generational challenge that we have. I'm wearing a shirt which references a prior generation of looking at the environment 50 years ago, and we still haven't solved it. We haven't sorted it out. We still have environmental issues to address. And the science that we're going to use to do it is ecosystem science. The term gets used a lot, but I want us to spend some time thinking about ecosystems. And lastly, I'm a project manager for the Mill Creek Alliance, and we have a lot of lessons to learn from 25 years of restoring the Mill Creek. I'll tell you a little bit about the organization I work for, the Mill Creek Alliance. We have been at this for 25 years with partners throughout this watershed, and we see the Mill Creek watershed as a natural and community asset. We have 3 areas that we work on. And the first one is environmental education. Over the years, we've been teaching tens of thousands of kids about the environment, giving them new experiences, and turning them into tree huggers. There's been a lot of value in that. Nonetheless, our generation, adults, need to get engaged now. We trained that generation, and now we're here at this point in time when we still need adults to act. Part of that is with our water quality monitoring program, where we have volunteers go out and do citizen science. It's done once a month, and it's useful science. We have achieved a certification so that Ohio EPA uses the data. If you're interested in it, on March 1st, we're going to present those data in the state of the Mill Creek. And so that'll be a presentation that's more focused on the basic science than this presentation is going to be. Because what I want to do is present some of the concepts that lie behind environmental restoration. Behind that is also recreation, which was arguably the first way that we got started. People just didn't want to go to meetings and be a part of steering committees. They just wanted to get out there and get the shopping carts out of the creek. So our Mill Creek Yacht Club got started with that. Are any of you members of the Mill Creek Yacht Club? Yeah. You should put it on your Cincinnati bucket list, because all you need to do is go out paddling with the Mill Creek Yacht Club and you get inducted. You get a t-shirt and you're a member of this elite group of people who go out and do recreation with a purpose. And we'd be delighted if you took the shopping carts home, but be careful. There are a lot of them still out there, and a lot of tires too. They're still in my creek. Lastly is the part that I oversee, which are restoration projects. And you can see the top part. This is up in Reading, Ohio, where we typically have these scary, steep, eroding banks that if you go counterclockwise, it's unbelievable. We hire contractors that may get earth-moving machinery out into the creek, cut back banks, and restore it, as you can see in the middle. Pizza, anybody? If not, I'll take it. Pizza guy first. So yeah, these are the restoration activities we do, and the sign, as I learned, is a critical part at the very end of the project, is to let people know, don't mow down the project when you're done, which happens on projects. So it's these 3 intersecting components that the Mill Creek Alliance tries to do. Right now, we're in the middle of the Mill Creek watershed, and you can see Fibonacci identified there. It's 100,000 acres, 2 counties, stretching down to the Ohio River. And at any given point, if you're not in the Mill Creek, then you're probably in one of our sister watersheds, the Great Miami to the west, or the Little Miami to the east. I was surprised to learn that the Little Miami is the biggest one out of them, which has ecological implications. They have more species of mussels in that water than the other watersheds do because they're larger and more diverse. So pretty fascinating. But this is the watershed that the Mill Creek Alliance and that we try to manage. And the thing about a watershed, it's a single system. So whether you're in Mount Healthy or you're in Liberty Township or downtown Cincinnati, it's all feeding into one place. That system is part of a larger system. In purple, you can see the Ohio River Valley. That covers 11 states, all into one drainage area. Those 11 states are part of the Mississippi drainage area, which is insane. It drains 40% of the United States to two countries. If you got in a car now, and if you drove for a day or 2 or 3 or 4, you could drive for 10 days and you'd still be in that watershed, the Mississippi River watershed. Like you'd be in the same ecosystem, like all interacting. And at various times I think about the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico into which the Mississippi River basin drains. So to solve that problem, you need to address this system. So these are these incredibly large systems that I think are really important to talk about, because at various times people talk about saving the planet. And I'm like, as a project manager, I'm like, okay, I'd like to do that, but we're going to have to phase that out. You know, we got to do a lot of phases, and God, what's the budget going to be on that? In light of these incredibly large systems. So let's wind it all back to what's an ecosystem, what's a watershed. The very first watershed was in New Hampshire at the Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest. In 1963, Gene Likens and Borman wanted to study deforestation. Incredibly, it's easy when you think like a scientist. You're like, okay, well, the control for a forest is no forest. So they deforested a watershed. These are pretty small in contrast to the Mill Creek being 166 square miles. These are some like that are 5 or 10 square miles. So they're a little bit smaller, but nonetheless, they had the cojones to deforest a portion of the natural environment, and nobody brought them up on federal charges too. So times have really changed. The other interesting thing about it is this was only in 1963. So this is a young science compared to biology, compared to chemistry, right? And along the way, as they were studying the system, where you can see that everything in that system drains to one common drainage area, which is the definition of what a watershed is. It drained through a culvert, and they could find out everything they needed to know by taking like one water sample. The entire system drained into one place. So what they did along the way was they created a new science, which was based on, wow, we can draw boundaries in the environment. It's not as complicated as we fear. As long as you mind your topography, it's all one system, which the definition of a system is a unit which has interacting parts that work together. I think at the time, too, the interesting thing is that computers were being developed, where you think, well, you have an input, X, it undergoes a function, and it comes out transformed. So this ecosystem approach, instead of obsessing about, oh God, what are the names of all the species, or I don't know my plants, or I don't know my trees, is it doesn't matter. Because the important thing is, what does it do? What are the processes that take place? It's a verb instead of a noun. And so we use that, and we're good at that. So when we talk about pollinators and pollination, we don't know. We don't know, what the species of the bee is. We don't care that it's a bumblebee or a carpenter bee or, or the plants, that are marigolds. The point is the bees are providing a service of pollination. And there are a lot of these services that take place. I mean, even more basic is just the service of providing clean drinking water. You think about the framing that takes place in houses. It's shocking to me. It's the 21st century, and people are still using lumber to build our houses. Recreation, meaningful life experiences. I told you there'd be a photo from Hawaii, where people fly from 2 continents out into the middle of Ohio. That was wishful thinking. They fly out to the middle of the Pacific Ocean to Hawaii to get married. And think of all that cost and expense and value put on a beautiful natural environment. And you can see 2 brides lining up on the same beach to get their photo of a lifetime. And then lastly is like the mind-blowing idea that the foundations of our culture and religion and spirituality is based in religion. So can you quantify those services? Or here goes some photos of disrupted environments. Imagine if you had to hire contractors when the Ohio River flooded in 2018 and the river extended out through Smale Park in downtown Cincinnati. Wow, if you had to hire somebody to take away that water, what would that have cost? So nature's providing all these services, whether it's clearing out the smog in Beijing. Well, there were a group of actually environmental economists who totaled up these numbers. They put a price tag on those goods and services, again, using this ecosystem approach. And they estimated that the value of 17 services, and I showed you a few of those services, across the entire biosphere, whether it's forest or lakes or marine systems, nearshore systems, open ocean, was worth $24 to $145 trillion from somewhere on order of the entire global GDP. Definitely more than the GDP of the United States. That ranges from 33% to 2 times the global GDP. The point I take from that is be way careful when you degrade environments, and investing in environments and the biosphere is a really great investment, giving you 33% return on your money to 200%. So, and it's almost like behind our global GDP, and we're working and doing everything we do in the human-centered built environment. It's like there's another planet running in the background, like supporting it. So there's this immense value of nature doing all the stuff that we would have to do, like cart away all the water when there's a flood. But it gets disposed of for free. So yeah, this is this immense power of looking at ecosystems. They, Costanza and that group, they did it on the planet level. We could scale it back to the Mill Creek level and our local area, our local economy is $20 billion. Same thing. We've got billions of dollars of worth of free natural services, even in our environment. It may be degraded. It may be on the low end. On the other hand, we might be able to increase it, or any environmental restoration we do is giving us tremendous value, from 30% return annually, again, 200% annually. You can't get that in the stock market. You might say, well, this is all really great, but at the same time, what do we have to do with it? Well, 1997, Vitusak and a group, they said, well, come on, if you look at the soil, at the earth, we've transformed that. If you look at the water, we have transformed that. We're using half of all accessible water. And now, as we know, if you look at the air and the atmosphere, we've literally transformed our planet's atmosphere. We're all freaking out about carbon in the atmosphere and CO2, but nobody even talks about the nitrogen fixation that we do. We fix more of the nitrogen in the atmosphere than nature does. And where does that nitrogen go? Well, a variety of industrial chemicals, but it includes fertilizers, which we then apply to land and sometimes run off into our surface waters. And that's where algal blooms come from, because we're just using an incredible amount of nitrogen, which came from the atmosphere. And so we're literally this global force. So that's a whole series of thinking, that ecosystem thinking allows you to do, conversations that you can have about the environment. We might not be able to have if we were just thinking about species, trying to identify the plant and animal species. So we're thinking systemically about the environment. So if I could change gears to then now thinking about, okay, the system that we're living in, the Mill Creek watershed, and thinking about its history and thinking about it as a case study. I mean, there are lots of places to begin. I mean, could begin with glaciation, but I'm going to start with the word, with the language that we use that we ended up deriving the Mill Creek. The Mill Creek is a fabricated word. Originally, the body of water that, again, all of activities drain into was called Makatewa. The Shawnee people that lived here had a different word for this place. And with that, they had a different concept. And as a science guy, and with science people here, sometimes we discount the value of language, but this just shows you 2 centuries of trajectory and history and development was changed with the word by Robert Cleve Sims, after whom Sims Township was named. There were no mills on the creek, and he changed the name. He thought, yeah, Makatewa was a little too earthy. Nobody's going to know what that is, but aspiring developers will feel more comfortable with the term Mill Creek, and this will be a river, which is now a creek, which is small. It's going to be a little, and it's going to be a creek of mills. Right. I'm not certain what the distinction is between a creek and a river or a stream, but I don't know. The Little Miami and Great Miami are rivers. It's 28 miles long. That's River E. So, but look at that. Our language our language affected our whole concept for all the activities that we do. And I'll tell you even worse, so that's key in that period of time of 1787, 230 years ago. I'll also say, along with that, there was a requirement to get the land purchases that Robert Cleve Sims got, and by the way, a guy from Jersey, which rubs me the wrong way as a New Yorker, was that the land had to be improved in 5 years. How do you improve land that has old growth forests on it? Cut down the trees. I mean, the land was 10,000 years in the making. So that, again, set us up for this series of developments where 1830s, you have slaughterhouses, 1836, combined sewers. So we're getting these organic inputs into the stream, and its functions and services now have additional services and functions that it may or may not be able to deliver at the necessary amount to also keep the natural functions and services. 1880, there were factories, and not only were the factories putting things into the water, they were taking the water out. There was a distiller in Northside that was taking out 1 million gallons of water a day in 1913, which means there isn't enough water to support the aquatic creatures that are in there, and let alone, changes the chemistry. So that's water extraction. In 1881, maybe the worst thing of all was literally decimating the trees in the area to on order of a tenth, 15% of what they were, and you lose all the functions and services of the trees that are around, whether they're cooling the water or providing food for the Carolina parakeet. We had parakeets like that, right? And then, of course, bears would come along and eat them, and the antelope, and the turkeys, and the deer. But it was this rich system, that when Europeans came and visited, they were stunned to see that. In 1937, there was a flood that led into downtown Cincinnati, and you can see a guy rowing a boat somewhere in the middle of Cincinnati, which led us to create the Barrier Dam to try to keep Ohio River water out from downtown Cincinnati. And then there was a whole channelization project, which is, what are we up to? The second or third worst thing you can do to a stream, which is cut the stream off from the stream bank, right? With its connection to the land.
Where else is he going to ride a motorcycle?
It feels like Darth Vader to me, putting him in concrete. So let's do this. Let's do this little quick study. I said that, actually Costanza said that there were 16 to 17 functions of ecosystems. So take a look at that channelized environment, and let's see how many of those functions you still have in the channelized portion of the Mill Creek. And in case you haven't seen this kind of thing, take a drive on 75, and that's what some people think the Mill Creek looks like, although the very first slide I showed you was a naturalized area. I mean, that you see pretty places like that. So, in an area like this, to my eye, you lose all those functions, and if I were to grade this approach to managing the real concern of flooding, I would give it an F. You only have 4 of 16, 17 functions, which is water supply, water control, and controlling flooding. But what about the pollination, right? And culture and soil formation and all those other goods and services that a functioning environment have. We at the Mill Creek Alliance think of 1997 as the low point in this ecosystem, the Mill Creek, watershed when the national organization American Rivers called the Mill Creek the most endangered river in America. And that was 97. That was 20 years after Woodsy and the first Earth Day. Like we still couldn't turn the Queen Mary around, of this problem of managing the environment. So since that time, the yacht club got in the water. They've been getting the shopping carts out. They had one session, they pulled out 470 tires. There's just been countless people doing work by volunteers and governmental organizations. And now we got this guy, Sean, the fisherman, who's sending us, he's like trolling us, sending us photos of all the fish he's catching, and they're diverse. When the fish come back, bald eagles come back, and we've got them along the Mill Creek, and there's a secret location where there's a nesting pair of bald eagles in the Mill Creek watershed. Yeah, it's unbelievable that the system, again, which has been mismanaged, inappropriately managed for over 200 years, is able to do that. The secret is like the most sensitive and delicate creatures are the freshwater clams, the freshwater mussels. As part of their life cycle, they attach to fish. So if the fish didn't come back, the clam larvae could not propagate themselves. So, yeah, they're delicate little creatures. And then ultimately, the people coming back, people recreating. It's at events like our Run the Riffles in the fall, which you're all invited to down at Solway Park, is another sign that the Mill Creek is being reviewed, is being improved. So, you can take a deep breath, maybe a sip of beer, and I just want to review a few concepts before I take a look at specifically how to degrade the environment and how to restore the environment. Anybody have anything that's confusing them, or any questions or comments? Clams go through a series of life stages. They're a fixed creature, but their baby larvae attach to the gills of fish. And they get a free ride. And they grow attached to the gills of fish. And when they grow too big, they drop off and they're dispersed, thanks to fish. So if you want to get clams, the bivalves back, you got to get the fish back. We have planted big ones, like the one I was holding. We actually transferred those from the Little Miami to the Mill Creek. We got U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They said, well, these clams originally were here. They were extirpated, made extinct, but they were there. So it's okay to transfer them from one basin to the other basin. We did, but we're definitely finding Asian clams, invasive clams, and others. So they're here, and they are arguably, they're competing with the bald eagles for signs of the most valuable species or the best indicators of a restored environment. Yeah. Yeah. I figure, the Cuyahoga River, which is now a national park. Come on. If Cleveland can do it, come on, Cincinnati. Yeah, the industries were just dumping their stuff for free. No, of course there were. But yeah, all of it. And I think that's a message too, is that anywhere you hear these environmental problems, they're kind of parallel. Sometimes in other parts of the world, okay, maybe Mexico is 20 years behind us. China, 30 years behind us, but that air pollution incident I showed you, that was modern day China, that happened in the 1950s here and in England, right? So we're all on this. Unfortunately, we're sharing a lot of information about managing the environment, and like some of it is good and helpful, but others of it is just poor regulation, poor management, poor stewardship. Yeah, but they're permitted, they're known, they're controlled. I mean, that's the benefit of the top-down regulation from the 70s. We have an Ohio EPA, US EPA. The industries are better, cleaner, but there's still a certain amount of human inputs getting into the creek, including the CSOs, which MSD is working to improve, but there's still inputs into this natural system. We're still working through it. So before I specifically focus on a few areas of concern about, okay, really restoring environment, a few last concepts before we go away. Talking about 16 functions and 17 and analysis and all that, it all comes back to, we can pull it back to the 4 classic parts of the environment. You got your earth, your water, your air, right? Just like in medieval Europe, and actually it was Zoroaster in pre-Persian Iran that came up with this concept. Your lithosphere, your earth, your atmosphere, air, and hydrosphere, water. And I put biosphere in the center because we're living things, so we're at the center of it all. Exchanging chemical and energy. So just mind your earth, air, and water when things get kind of crazy, and your biology. So that's the first concept. The second one is time and space, right? Like all really great science, it takes environmental science is no different. On the x-axis, it takes time to restore environments. Notice it's a log scale. I got this from an engineering handbook, and I'm pretty psyched. We're 25 years into this, and we're doing pretty well. They have the axis going out to 100 and 1,000 years, which at the same time means, whoa, we're restoring the environment, but the natural environment, whatever that is, may take centuries to get back to. There's quality, that we may never really reach for centuries, but we're doing good work, but there's more. The other one is space, is that you can work at a small scale, you can work in your backyard, you can work at a park, but if you work at a watershed system, then you're going to achieve a lot more improvement and better quality improvement, let alone larger scale like the Mississippi River. So time and space. The other one is that there's a hierarchy. We all want the bald eagles, and now you all want clams and mussels. You didn't know you wanted that before, but that's dependent on getting the biology right, dependent on getting the chemistry right, and that's dependent on getting the earth science right. And I guess this was written by a hydrogeologist who said, you got to get the water right. And that's the foundation. And there's a perfectly good argument to that. So there's a hierarchy of when you're going to get to the bald eagle babies all over the place. So with that, I want to outline environments, and I'm going to focus on streams because that's what we do. Streams have a structure to them. The stream corridor includes the channel, the place where the water reaches the surface. You can do a project in just the water, or you can do a project in the riparian zone. which is that interesting transition zone, and environments, transition zones are the really rich places. So it's a mix of water, but it's a mix of land. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. And then there's upland area. The floodplain can extend for miles, so be careful, because a lot of our developments, yeah, it's easily in a floodplain, which typically floods every year or two. Every year and a half, it's totally normal for that little stream channel to have a large-scale event. So I want to talk about what's degradation. One example of degradation, and in this case, the Ohio EPA, US EPA definition of impairments is as good as any. Sediment in a stream, that impairs it. Habitat may be an area that could get impaired. The stream itself, or nutrients. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. Yeah, okay, so let's see. When it comes to thinking about sediment, that's erosion, and these gentlemen need more drinks, or they need to pay their tab. I don't know which. When you think about sediment getting into streams, and let me just double check. I think I'm kind of driving around poorly. Okay, concepts. I think that was supposed to be degradation. Okay, so I think this is what I want to focus on. This was a confluence of two streams. It was actually in Twin Creek, in Sharonville. If you've ever gone there, it's a great park, and it is at the confluence of the Mill Creek main stem. You can see Beaver Run coming in, and if that's not enough, East Fork comes in. It's actually three streams coming together. You should totally go there because it's powerful. I love confluences. In this case, you can see at this confluence, the quality of the water is totally different. That's a red flag. And you can see that there is sediment in that stream. So it's kind of a mystery for us to look at. So in thinking about that, the sediment can come from stream banks, and as you consider that, the sedimentation that gets into streams has implications on the habitat. So even though so you can see that this tree is being undermined by the sediment coming out of that stream, going through that circle of the different interacting parts of the environment. Once you get sediment in the water, what effect does that have on water quality in the environment? Well, you're down the rabbit hole. You change the light getting through the water, which then affects photosynthesis. It changes the ecology, both of the plants, then it affects that of the animals. The sediment gets embedded into the creek, and that's a term that's used for when a rocky, cobbly stream, which is a great place for fish to hide, is now gunked up with sediment. And so now you're selecting for sediment dwellers and not trout. Ultimately, and then if you're interested in the human side of things, you then have additional water treatment costs. So this whole cascading set of issues are caused by erosion. The way that sediment can get into the stream is it could be by runoff, or it can be from eroding stream banks. This is a eroding stream bank in Evendale. It's a project that I did, and that looks bad, but it's worse because it is part of a much longer length of eroding stream bank. So when you see that, know that that ecosystem, that stream is not functioning correctly. The way, and when we're analyzing that degradation, well, I estimate it's 100 yards long. And if you think about 100 yards, it's being cut back another yard every year. And if you imagine a box about another yard high, well, that becomes 100 cubic yards of sediment, about 100 tons of sediment, the weight of 50 cars eroding into the stream. Right? That's one 100-yard segment. And I was speaking to our stream specialist for Hamilton County, and he said, yeah, this is what we see in most of our streams throughout the county. So, how do we fix that? Well, again, we can work in these different areas, restoring the channel. In that case, you're concerned about the stream bank. And we've got a few different approaches. You can excavate and recontour that stream. If you take a look, you can see before that steep 90-degree angle, again, it's not unusual, that can be recontoured. So this gives us a schematic of what we're trying to achieve. And we did that in the Hartwell neighborhood. We excavated and recontoured a stream bank, and you can see that there's a steel plant in the back. You can see we added rock to armor the toe that sticks out into the creek, and that bank has been cut back at a steep angle. And for the record, moving dirt around is so expensive. Like hopefully, I didn't check those numbers, but man, you got to leave that soil on site, because if you start trucking that off, it's really pricey. I told you about armoring with rock at the rock toe. And here's a smaller example. This is a stream in Sharonville. The rock you choose depends on the force of the stream. You better choose the right size rock, heavy enough to be stable, because as I showed you, the weight of water, the weight of water can be considerable too. But then the last part to finish it off, to really bioengineer it, is to plant. And that's what my engineering friends call landscaping. They call it bioengineering, which I think is kind of funny. Because it's really just landscaping and planting. And so the last photo in that series shows you after recontouring and doing the hardscaping, then the planting afterwards adds to the stability of the slope. We're usually obsessed about native plants, and the reason for that is if you look in the center, fescue turf, the grass that you have on your lawn only has roots that are inches deep, and that doesn't do much good in contrast on the right side, which is a whole series of native plants. And look at that. I mean, they can have roots that go down 10, 15 feet. Here's a researcher, Dr. Jerry Glover, who's perfected this way of extracting plants from the soil around them. And look at him. He is standing next to the roots of Indian grass, and these are huge. This is the solar-powered, green, smart technology that we're all hoping that can be developed by MIT scientists, but it already exists. We've already got them, and they're plants. And by the way, they've been adapted for 10,000 years to this and many environments. So that's why plant natives, because they bioengineer the environment, and I'll show you in a minute, and they've got additional ecosystem services and functions. And here you can see Chip Skidmore, a local lawyer, out in the stream, and we're going to have one of these events where we are putting live stakes into a stream bank. These are willow stakes during their dormant period, during the winter, and you kind of tap them into a stream while they're asleep, and they wake up, and then they start growing. Bioengineering a failing stream bank like that. And we're going to have, and again, there's going to be an event like that taking place this March, so you may want to get out there. This is my one set of data for all of you that are saying, yeah, but we want the basic science information. And this is from a book on the nature of oaks. If the best thing you can do for the environment is to plant a tree, the best tree you can plant in the environment is an oak. You got to be careful because they turn into monster trees. They start having babies when they're 75 and live to be 200. But out of any of the plants, the top graph shows the number of tree species worldwide. Oaks have many more species and are much more diverse than other trees. And then the bottom one shows the number of caterpillar larvae hosted by oaks in contrast to other plants. Oaks blow away other trees. So they're incredibly high functioning trees. They're just a very long investment, and the big mamas, they're really, you need room. You need room for them, but they're a great investment and they're local. Yes, native plants, yeah, they give the diversity that leads to biodiversity and the primary production, which is the bottom of an ecosystem, feeds the ecosystem. But then, in particular, they have leaves and acorns, and they manage water and carbon dioxide. They're a habitat for other creatures, and they give us raw materials. Like, it is unbelievable. I mean, I don't think we can really come up with a different way to battle climate change and restore our environment than to just work with trees as part of a restored environment. So, as I close this up, this has been great, sharing all this information with you, but the next step is to do, right? We've been drinking, we've been thinking, and the last thing is to be doing. I did bring seed packets, and I include some acorns, so like if you've got an area, a square yard is all you need. I encourage you to put some seeds out and have your wild 1 yard. And if you got a big enough area to host a monster oak, I've got some oak seeds, but be careful. I mean, there are power lines, you got to watch out for that kind of thing. But yeah, do that. I've got a little Mill Creek Alliance shrine over there with door prizes. But you can come out. My colleague, Linda Keller, is going to be hosting a seed bomb and winter sowing program this Saturday. There are still slots left for some of you, but not all of you. All of you. You can all come. And she's a great home brewer, too. I try to have work parties in the watershed once a month, first Saturday, getting out to a particular site, and we're usually cutting down honeysuckle. But I'm going to use some of these seeds and get them in the ground. March 1st on a Wednesday is State of the Mill Creek. We'll present data. And then later in March, we have live willow stake harvesting is one step, cutting them from live willow trees. And the second step is then installing them as you saw. So, come on out and be a part of this and contribute. And otherwise, enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for coming. If you have not gotten a card from me, try to find me on video cards. You can follow us on Facebook. But just a reminder, next month, February's Science Time right here, Wednesday the 15th. We're going to have John Funk, who's going to talk about what's new in aviation for 2023, cool new planes, and the science behind how they work. Everybody else designed Air Force One, so maybe we can ask him a couple questions. But other than that, just thank you very much, everybody, for coming.
Sure.